the first thing that drifted into my consciousness, a cold reminder that I was still anchored to a hospital bed. I had just woken up from a 2-week coma, the fog finally lifting from my brain, but a strange, protective instinct told me to keep my eyes shut. I lay completely paralyzed, pretending to sleep, as the door clicked open. It was my mother and my fiancé. I expected tears of relief, perhaps a desperate prayer for my recovery. Instead, my mother let out a sharp, cold sigh and whispered to him, "The doctor said if she doesn't wake up by tomorrow, they'll discuss pulling the plug. Finally, we can get her signature transferred and take full control of the inheritance before anyone asks questions." My blood turned to pure ice. Thank God I didn't open my eyes. The cold hospital air smelled of antiseptic and faded flowers, a sharp contrast to the warmth I used to feel whenever I thought of the people waiting for me to wake up. My name is Amber. I am 27 years old, and up until 2 weeks ago, I believed I had a life most people would envy. I had a thriving career, a mother who called me her proudest achievement, and a fiancé who swore he couldn't breathe without me. Then came the rainy Tuesday night on Highway 50, a sudden flash of headlights, the horrific screech of tearing metal, and a void of absolute darkness. When my mind finally broke through the surface of that 2-week coma, I couldn't move a single muscle. My eyes were glued shut, heavy as lead weights, but my hearing was sharp, hyper-focused on the quiet murmur of voices hovering right above my pillow. It was Victoria, my mother, and Christian, my fiancé. I expected to feel the gentle touch of Christian's hand or hear my mother's voice trembling with tears of relief. Instead, the air in the ICU room felt completely still, thick with an unspoken, transactional coldness. I lay there, trapped inside the quiet prison of my own body, listening to the two people I trusted most in the world talk about my life as if it were a business asset they couldn't wait to liquidate. The realization hit me harder than the car crash. They weren't praying for a miracle recovery. They were actively counting down the hours until I became a ghost. The quiet hum of the heart monitor felt like a ticking clock, marking the seconds of a betrayal I never saw coming. I kept my breathing shallow, mimicking the deep, unresponsive rhythm of a comatose patient while Christian shifted his weight beside my bed. "Dominic said the power of attorney paperwork is ready," Christian whispered, his voice stripped of the warmth he usually reserved for me. "But we need to move fast. If the hospital administrators get suspicious about the signatures, the whole asset transfer freezes." My mother let out a low, impatient sigh. "Don't lose your nerve now, Christian. My late husband built that tech consulting firm for our family, not for Amber to lock away in a private trust. It belongs to me." Hearing my father's legacy discussed like prey made my blood run cold. When he passed away last year, he left the bulk of his estate and the thriving business to me, knowing my mother's reckless spending habits would destroy it. Christian, it turned out, was no better. I listened in absolute horror as he muttered about his mounting luxury debts and the creditors threatening to expose his failed investments. 3 months ago, when he slipped a diamond ring onto my finger and swore we were building a future together, it wasn't love. It was a calculated, desperate execution of a plan to access my wealth. The agonizing heartbreak tore through my chest, but I forced my body to remain perfectly still. The man I loved and the woman who gave me life were snakes waiting to strike, and my silence was my only shield. For the next 48 hours, the ICU room became my surveillance post. I mastered the art of the perfect lie, keeping my eyelids heavy, my muscles slack, and my breathing unbothered by the storms raging inside my mind. I learned to read the rhythm of their footsteps, the subtle shift in the room's energy whenever they stepped close to my bed to ensure I hadn't slipped away. It was a brutal, exhausting existence, but isolation has a strange way of revealing people's true colors. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and see how far my story has reached. The true depths of their trap revealed itself on Thursday afternoon. The heavy click of leather shoes announced the arrival of Dominic Sterling, the unethical lawyer Christian had mentioned earlier. I held my breath as the three of them huddled near the window, their voices hushed but sharp with anxiety. "We have a major problem," Dominic hissed, tossing a thick folder onto the bedside table. We managed to forge the initial power of attorney, but the final asset transfer protocols require a multi-factor authentication code. It's hardwired to go directly to Amber's personal smartphone. Christian swore under his breath, his footsteps pacing frantically across the linoleum floor. Her phone is locked in the hospital security safe downstairs with her personal effects, he muttered, his voice tight with panic. Only a direct family member or an authorized medical staff member can retrieve it under strict supervision. My mother's tone turned icy. Then we find a way to get it. If she passes away or the doctors declare brain death before we input that code, the entire portfolio locks into probate and we get absolutely nothing. The heavy silence returned as Christian and Victoria left to grab dinner, leaving me alone with the steady hum of the machines. A few minutes later, the door slid open with a soft click. It was Elena, the night nurse who had been checking my vitals for the past week. As she adjusted my foreline, I noticed her lingering, her eyes scanning my face with a quiet, intense curiosity. "I know you're in there, Amber," she whispered softly, her voice carrying a genuine warmth I hadn't heard in days. "Your heart rate spikes every single time your mother and fiancé walk into this room, but it settles the moment they leave. You can hear them, can't you?" Taking the biggest gamble of my life, I slowly blinked my eyes open. Elena gasped, but I immediately pressed a weak finger to my lips, tears welling in the corners of my eyes. I squeezed her hand with what little strength I had left. "Please," I croaked, my throat dry and raspy. "Don't tell the doctors. Don't tell my family. They're trying to steal everything my father left me, and if they know I'm awake, I don't know what they'll do to me." Elena's expression hardened with a fierce, protective determination. She explained that she had always found their lack of grief disturbing. Risking her own career, Elena sneaked down to the hospital security office during her break, using her medical clearance to retrieve my personal smartphone from the safe. By midnight, she had safely tucked the device beneath my pillow. Even better, she used her personal phone to contact Mr. Harrison, my late father's fiercely loyal corporate attorney, setting our counterstrike into motion. With the smartphone safely hidden beneath my pillow and Elena guarding the door, I spent the darkest hours of the night communicating with Mr. Harrison. Through hurried, silent texts, he confirmed my worst fears, but he also handed me the weapon I needed to destroy them. It turned out that Victoria and Christian hadn't just been greedy, they had been profoundly reckless. Desperate to multiply their expected fortune, they had heavily leveraged their own homes and personal bank accounts to buy into a highly volatile, fraudulent offshore real estate scheme. They were drowning in immediate liabilities, completely counting on the rapid liquidation of my father's tech firm to save themselves from imminent financial ruin. Instead of exposing their forgery and halting the process, I felt a cold, calculating determination wash over me. I instructed Mr. Harrison to play their game, but to subtly alter the legal architecture of the digital transfer documents Dominic had drafted. Working through the back end of our secure corporate network, Harrison meticulously rewrote the final destination protocols. We set an elaborate financial trap. The moment Victoria and Christian utilized my phone's verification code to finalize the illegal transfer, it wouldn't grant them access to my private trust or my father's successful consulting business. Instead, the altered contract would execute an automatic legal merge. It would seamlessly bind their personal accounts to the crushing, toxic debts of my father's oldest, completely bankrupt holding shell companies. They thought they were quietly stealing a lifeline, but under my direction, they were eagerly signing their names to a financial death warrant. The trap was set, and the stage was perfectly prepared for the final act. The next morning, I allowed my eyes to drift open naturally while the primary medical staff conducted their rounds, triggering a flurry of excitement throughout the ICU. Within an hour, Victoria and Christian rushed through the doors, their faces twisted into theatrical masks of overwhelming joy and relief. Christian practically threw himself over my bed, squeezing my hand with synthetic warmth, while my mother wiped away non-existent tears. "Oh, Amber, it's an absolute miracle," she gasped, her eyes darting greedily toward her purse. "We were so incredibly worried about you." The doctors said we needed to handle some insurance and recovery forms immediately to ensure your care continues smoothly. I played the role of the frail, disoriented victim flawlessly, letting my voice trail off into a weak whisper as I nodded along with their rushed explanations. Dominic Crawford stepped forward from the corner of the room, pulling out a tablet and the official transfer documents. Christian smoothly produced my smartphone from his pocket, pretending he had just retrieved it for me, and watched like a hawk as the multi-factor authentication code flashed across the screen. He quickly typed the numbers into the tablet, and with a trembling hand, I signed the digital signature line. Victoria and Christian exchanged a triumphant, arrogant smile, entirely convinced they had just secured their effortless millions. But the victory lasted less than 10 seconds. Dominic's phone buzzed with the automated confirmation text from the corporate registry. As he scrolled down to verify the transaction, the smug grin completely vanished from his face, and he turned utterly pale. "What is it, Dominic?" Christian demanded, his voice dropping all pretense of affection. The lawyer looked up, his eyes wide with pure horror. "They didn't transfer her wealth," Dominic whispered hoarsely. "The corporate structure just merged. They just legally signed away their own financial lives and took on millions in toxic liabilities." The fallout was swift and absolute. Within weeks, Victoria and Christian were hit with a tidal wave of corporate lawsuits and foreclosure notices they had no hope of paying. The state authorities launched a full investigation into their attempted forgery and medical exploitation. Entire in the tech firm wrapped up my affairs and bought a small, sunlit cottage in a quiet coastal town, miles away from the venomous betrayal that almost took my life. For the first time, I am living for myself, completely free. What would you do if you woke up to find